tumble or rotate. So you can see me doing that now. Scrolling the middle mouse wheel in or out will zoom. Also, down here you'll notice that there's captions for what I'm doing. It's a little plugin called Screencast Keys, and it's helpful for displaying all these kinds of fancy things. Next, I would like to show you the Wacom controls. So Alt left click will let you tumble. Alt Shift left click is pan, and Alt Control and left click is zoom. So now it basically says control middle mouse. That's kind of what it emulates. So that's if you enable emulate three button mouse. Now we can right click down here at the border to split the viewport in two, or we can right click between and select join area to rejoin our areas. T opens up the tool menu, and N opens up the transform menu, and that's where you get your location, rotation, scale, all that fun stuff. So the next fun thing is we can actually switch these borders. So if you right click on the menu, you can flip it to the top or collapse it. And I'm going to flip it back to the bottom. I'm going to get rid of my tool and menu panels. So next I want to show you is that we can actually create objects by holding down Shift A to open up our add menu, and we can add meshes, curves, surfaces, text, armatures, basically every kind of standard object you would find in Blender. You can create through this means. All right, so now there is also a menu option where we can search for things that we need. So like say we're looking for a specific command like add text, and now we have text in our viewport. And here's in the center of our viewport is the cursor, so we can actually click and select it to a different area. This is where things will either rotate around depending on how you have it set up, and it moves in 3D space too. So notice how it's up there now, and if I click here, it's just kind of floating around. To place it back in the center, hold down our Shift S, which will bring your cursor back to the center. Okay, so for some reason if I don't want the text, I can hit Control Z, and that's an undo. That'll just wipe it out after a few times. And next I'm going to show you the basic controls for manipulating objects. So here's our object, and we can actually switch into edit mode by hitting Tab. So now we're in edit mode, and this is where the meat and potatoes of modeling is. And to translate an object, you hit G, and you can grab it and drag it around in screen space. If you want to, say, rotate an object, you hit R, and you can rotate it based on the viewport as well. And scaling works the same way. So I'm going to undo a couple times, and there's a numpad viewport change on the numpad, and 7 will bring you to the top view, 1 will bring you to left and right, and 3 will bring you to front view. So, and those are all orthographic as well. Now what I want to show you is you can select vertices by right-clicking, and you can switch between these modes by either down here, vertex, edge, and faces mode. So edge mode will let you only select the edges. Faces mode will only let you select the faces. And you can actually quickly switch between them by hitting Control Tab up here, and it'll open up the mesh select mode. So say I want to switch back to edges or what have you, but I want to go back to verts. So another important thing to note is that while scaling, rotating, and translating, what you can do is you can actually lock it to an axis. So say I want to drag it, but I only want to drag it in the x-axis. So I hit X, and now it drags along the x-axis. If I wanted to go along the z-axis, I just hit Z, and it will now translate only along the z-axis. And same goes for Y, etc. And you can actually hit Shift and Z, and it will translate along everything but the z-axis, or Shift and Y and everything but the y-axis is the way it's going to operate. And you can do that with rotation as well. So Z, rotate along the Z, X, rotate along the X, And that is basically it for those controls. We're now going to move on into construction. So we've already added our mesh. Now we can extrude faces. We can extrude single points off of our mesh, which is not something most other programs allow you to do, which is kind of great, at least not by default. All right, so now we can turn these points into a face by hitting F. And we can also, if we remove the point from that, we can select both of these and hit F to make an edge as well. So F is to create edges or faces. And now we can create loop cuts by hitting Control R, and that'll open up this thing. We can actually switch which side we want to cut loops on. Notice how it doesn't like generating the loop on this weird set of polygons. So we can do it like this, cut it again, we can cut and then slide, and that's just dragging the mouse back and forth. So we can, it's a very powerful tool. And also you can select loops by Alt right clicking. And to select and deselect the way I've been doing it is that if you have things selected, if you hit A, it'll deselect everything. If you have nothing selected and hit A, it'll select everything. So it's like a toggle for selecting all or none. O is the toggle for proportional editing, which means if I click and drag this, I have an area of influence, and I can middle mouse wheel to increase or decrease that amount of stretching. And we can also change the curve of it here, of proportional editing. So I'm going to turn that off. And right now I'm going to select my mesh and hit Control N. So Control N is recalculate normal. So if you ever have a problem where there's mesh bits facing the wrong way, it'll recalculate the mesh based off of where its brother and sister normals are. All right, so we can also, I'm going to go back to face mode, so Control Tab, we can hide aspects of our mesh. So but you select it and you hit H, and you can hit Alt H to unhide everything. You can select your piece of the mesh, hit Control I to invert it, and then hit H. So now you are only hiding everything but what you want. So it's a cool way to isolate things to work. And Alt H to unhide everything. So say you want to only work on like this area of the mesh. And I'm going to switch back to vertex modeling mode. And you want to select all the verts connected to this. So if you want to do that, you can hit Control plus, and that will increase your selection by 1. And you can keep doing it until you select everything. In order to actually undo that, you can hit Control and then minus. Actually, you must not have everything selected, so we're just gonna, because it doesn't know which way to come back from. So Control minus will do that. Another fun thing is right click and then hit Control L. It'll select everything that's linked to it, so you can quickly change if the geometry is floating or not. And another fun and very important one is P for separate selection, and we have moved that into a separate object itself. And last but not least, for very quick controls, F12 is render. All right, if we use the numpad view hotkeys, we can rotate our view fairly quickly. And what smooth view does is it actually changes it from a instant transition from viewport to viewport and adds a little bit of a tumble to it. So this is really useful for inexperienced users to identify how their object is rotating in 3D space, because people can get fairly confused fairly quickly if you're new at any kind of 3D manipulation program. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually disable that. And to do that, we have to go to File, User Preferences, and in here there's a Smooth View option. We can click on it, and if we increase this number from 300 to say 400, it'll actually slow down that transition. So if you're having issues navigating 3D space, turn it up. But if you're an experienced user or an advanced user, set it to 0, and now we can instantly transition between our viewports, which is fantastic and awesome, and that's how I like working. And now we can move over to the input screen, and here are several options that we're going to go over because they're very useful for way of life and configuring the software to be how you would like it. In this tutorial series, emulate 3-button mouse is going to be very important. I don't know about you, but when I sculpt, I use a Wacom tablet or another kind of tablet. And I'm just going to enable 3-button mouse because this will allow me to navigate the viewport using my Wacom tablet instead of having to switch to the mouse to rotate the viewport or other fun things like that. So it's going to speed up my workflow. Over here, depending on the 3D software that you came from, you can set it up so that your Blender user interface navigates like the software that you came from, like say Max or Maya or Lightwave or Modo. You can switch the orbit style from turntable to trackball. You can switch the zoom style, etc., etc. So go play in this area. It's got some cool stuff, and you can actually change hotkeys and all this other cool stuff. Like in add-ons, there is the basic plugin interface. So whenever you come to Blender and you need a plugin either to install one or to activate one, Blender actually comes with a suite of plugins that are not enabled by default, but we will start enabling at least one of them today. And down here you can actually install from files, so you can search for a Python script and enable it that way. So I already know what the plugin that I want to enable is called, and I'm going to type F2 up here. So F2, what that does is it is a tool that will allow us to stitch polygons really quickly, and it's fantastic. I love it. I don't model without it anymore. And to enable this add-on, we click over here in this little checkbox, and our little man is lit up, and now we have F2 activated in Blender. So continuing onwards to the System tab, we have our hidden but very, very important option. So by default, VBOs is not on. You check that, and what that will allow us to do is that will allow us to sculpt millions of polygons instead of hundreds of thousands of polygons. If we don't have this enabled, our viewport will update slowly, and it'll be nearly impossible to sculpt at any kind of good rate. And now we should save our user settings so that this will actually remain after we close and reopen Blender for our next lesson. So let's close this. And now there are more options to increase the speed of sculpting, because we need to do that in order to actually sculpt as many polygons as we possibly can. And we can open up this panel over on this side, and by default it opens up to tools. I've already selected options, and what we need to do is we need to enable threaded sculpt and enable fast navigate. So threaded sculpt will allow us to use our sculpting tools much quicker than we would be able to normally. And I am going to go back to object mode. Notice how this panel changes. So these panels on the sides will change based on context. And now we're back in object mode. What we're going to do is we're going to set up our viewports to how I like to generally work. I like to have on my left side a viewport that basically stays the same, and over here a perspective viewport where I switch between these two for modeling. And over on this side, what we need to do is we're actually going to load up our concept art, and let us go down to background images, click check, and add image. And now it's going to bring up a little panel. I'm going to hit open, and we're going to go open our Vortex Phase Blaster concept.png. So now it kind of opens it up in the viewport behind, and we can actually drag this over to close it and hit Z to go into wireframe so we can see our artwork. And this is our basic setup for how we're going to proceed in the next lesson. So that's how we can set up Blender for high polygon count modeling. All right. So first things first, we gotta rotate our view. We gotta go up here to our modifier panel, and you can actually wiggle any kind of panel like this around by holding down middle mouse click and just shifting it. You can also do it here too. So we're gonna go to our modifiers panel, turn on our mirror modifier. An important thing about modifiers is that they are only you can only activate them in object mode. If you try to do it in edit mode, things get a little weird. So here we have our little ghosted wireframe over here. Turn on clip. Gonna try to merge them. Delete the face on the inside because that is going to cause problems later on. And we're gonna start modeling. So here is how I model, and basically what it is I'm just pushing vertices around, and yeah, it's not that difficult. So also Control R over here to create an edge loop, and then you can shift it around so you can add detail where you want, like how there's this little flange here that I want to have that detail in. I'm just gonna move points around. So right now all I'm dealing with is creating geometry in this viewport, and I'm going to kind of start modeling it out over here as well. And just going to keep pulling things, moving things around. Extrude, extrude. And one of the most important skills I would assume that every 3D modeler would have is creating little sound effects while they model. At least that's what I do. And my coworkers have yet to complain, which is kind of great. But yeah, no, it's always important to have fun with what you're doing. And let us select all the faces, and we can do that by either box selecting them, and that's what I'm going to do because I want all the verts. I'm going to extrude this out, and I'm going to kind of massage these verts into place. Move things around, and I'm going to be doing a lot of shifting around of points. I'm just going to follow inside a little bit so we can layer these other meshes on top. And the way I'm going to be modeling this is through a series of different objects, and what that's kind of like is modeling using subtools in ZBrush, and it's just how I like modeling, and I find it to be a less destructive way. So if you have to like obliterate part of your model, you can quickly recover. So like say I'm working on this bit, I can just delete that and just rebuild it. All right, so we have our fancy little mesh right now, and I'm actually gonna kind of pull the points in a little bit. So Z is to shift between visibility modes, so like wireframe, which I've been on, and shaded mode, so we can kind of move points around, and I do a lot of point-by-point modeling. My friends in the modeling world kind of stare at me funny because I like this style of modeling, but it's always been good to me because it gives me just the control that I really enjoy having. And I'm just gonna keep pulling these points out like this. And I'm going to pull this in so that we have these curved surfaces that I want. And of course I'm going to start kind of moving things around, but we're starting to get a little rounded shape towards the end, which is what we're going to have. We're going to have a little bulb here. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually take a chunk of this mesh, rip it off, and I'm by Shift D, which is duplicate, and then I'm going to type separate in here, which I did before, and it keeps your searches, which is great. So spacebar to search for a command that you want. So like say if I wanted to like rotate, I see rotate here, and it also shows me the hotkey if it's assigned. So separate is P, and you can separate by selection, material, loose parts, and it's very, very helpful when you've got a complex model. And I'm just gonna kind of scale it in the Y direction to 0. I'm holding down Control, and I'm gonna start creating shapes over here. I want to straighten this up in X as well. So I'm just kind of scaling and dragging points around. And now I'm going to start modeling out this chunk, and I want it kind of specific because I'm going to be using this geometry later for sculpting, and I want to have the topology in the correct area so that I can sculpt without problems. The goal in this aspect of our modeling process is to actually create a low polygon mesh and try to not have to retopo as much as possible, which is fantastic when you actually get good at this. Just kind of gotta build the parts to how you need them. So I'm gonna kind of extrude out, realign them here, pull them in, extrude, pull in, gonna clip and put it down just a little bit. So I'm just kind of teasing out our concept art, and I'm just gonna keep up this process, duplicate, separate, selection, switch over, and that's how I'm going to build the rest of our mesh, by just ripping out pieces and developing our mesh like this, so I have as much control as possible. In our next lesson, we're going to complete the volume build out, and then and where we've got it so far, I want to continue building this little lip thing, and to do that I'm going to go over here, add another couple sections there, keep going, and I'm going to actually hold down Alt right click to select the edge, and this is super useful for edge loop modeling, and everyone should love it because edge loop modeling is fantastic because you can modify tons of stuff at once. And I want to continue building this fancy mesh. I'm actually going to select all of them, drag them down a little bit because that seems to be more in line with our mesh. I'm going to bring this out here, and I'm going to bring this area. Actually, how many loops do we have? I think another would be fine. So I'm going to grab this, extrude down, grab this, pull up. I just kind of mess with everything. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over here and maximize this window by holding down Control up. And now I can kind of mush these points around in space a little bit easier because I can see everything now. And I got to make sure to move this one in too, because that's going to cause problems. Okay. And I'm going to demaximize the window. I'm going to maximize this one so I can actually see the concept art when wiggling points around. I'm going to massage these verts back. And yes, I do say verts and points as the same thing because they are. So this is starting to look pretty good. And I want to create this spherical shape, and what better way to do it than with a sphere? So I'm going to make sure that my cursor is in the center by holding Shift-C, brings up this snap window, cursor to center. So my cursor is where all objects will spawn from. So mesh UV sphere, and I'm going to hit T to bring up my panel over here. And I want this to have an equal number of segments and rings. So let's say 16 by 16, and little properties are shown up here. I'm going to hit Edit, Rotate. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to close down this view, bring us the modifier stack, and I can't do it because I'm in edit mode. Switch turn mirror on, flip it on the side, and I'm going to select half the mesh. And because I know that I don't want that, I want everything but half the mesh, I'm going to hold down Control and hit Delete on my numpad. And what that's going to do is basically take all the edges of the mesh and remove one selected area. So now I can delete my verts, and now I can hit clip, and I'm going to just be absolutely sure that everything here is centered. Okay, now I've got my fancy little golf ball. I'm going to rotate it so that the poles are on either end like this. I'm just going to embiggen this a little bit. Embiggen is a technical term. If you are unsure of why, no, it's not a word. It's a word. It's got to be a word, right? All right. So, anyways, we're continuing onward. I'm gonna scale some of these things to fit with this orb a little bit better. And I did not select everything. So another interesting thing is that if you are in shaded mode, you don't necessarily select everything because there is a opaque object between you and your verts that you're trying to select. So be careful of that, and let's just keep going. I want to make this a little bit more narrow. Let's bring this in, and I'm gonna open this back up, create a cylinder T, and I'm gonna bring that down to 18 because I like powers of 2. Bring it over here. No, wait, 18 is not a power of 2. So 18 is a power of 3. I don't think that's even a thing. Okay, but anyways, cylinder, and switching it to 16 verts. And I'm going to rotate. And like with our other ones, I'm going to mirror it. And to do that, I have to hit Control up, bring it over here, tab, add modifier, mirror. Spend a lot of time in this process just mirroring things, don't I? Okay, so switching back here, we're going to create the barrel of the weapon, and Control tab to switch to faces mode, selecting the front, selecting the back. We don't want these faces for right now, just remove them. And now Control tab, vertex, draw this out, and draw this in. So we're going to have this barrel enter this shape a little bit. And I kind of move these points around. And again, like with the sphere, we're going to mirror it. Delete these faces, vertices, and clip. Now we can drag it in and out, and it'll retain its center verts. Scale it down, gonna move it in, and let's just kind of make it align with our weapon. And make sure that the sizing is correct for the barrel. And we're gonna, of course, translate it back in to a rough approximate shape, and I'm going to pull this in. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to do some detail modeling a little bit later. So what that would involve is actually splitting this and creating a little barrel aspect. So now we want to create more of our basic shapes. I actually want to have this little butt as part of this part of the mesh, so I don't have to basically to cut down on polygons. So on this side is where it is mirrored, And I'm going to select all these points. I'm going to just extrude them out, scale it on Z for our European and Canadian friends. And I'm just going to kind of pull this out and see what happens with it. And so for next time, we will continue to model out these basic shapes, and I will show you some fancy things that we can do today to create a circle. Then we're going to hit T to open up our sweet panel over here, change our vertices to 16 because that's what I need. I don't need 32. Going to hit Tab, check out my sweet mesh, and I am going to mirror it as well, just like everything else. So delete vertices. Also, I'm going to hit T to clear that. Modifier, mirror. And now I should have a circle, which I'm going to now bring over here. And I'm going to kind of just shift some parts around. And now I will complete the circle. I need to make sure that clip is on. And there we go. So now it's clipped, it's connected, and now it's time to build out parts. So E for extrude, pull this out, do about there, and now extrude again, and now scale it inwards to create that little opening. And this is going to be the chamber for our weapon. This is going to be where we throw ammo into it to shoot out. I'm just going to kind of tweak it a little bit to give it the profile that I want it to have. I'm doing this because there's a high probability that I will be animating it in the future. And I'm holding down Control to snap to grid space. Now I've got that cylinder shape that I want. Okay, so we will also be adding a cap to it. So I'm going to select, I'll select, I only need one. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to duplicate this, Shift D, and I am going to separate it to another selection. I'm going to select it again, go back into edit mode, and I'm just going to extrude out up top here, a little bit in, and I'm going to hit E to extrude, merge at center, and now I'm going to drag this point over, and that creates my cap. I'm going to add a little bit of geometry here by holding down Control R to create an edge loop, and then you can just kind of drag it around. It's awesome. I use it constantly. I'm going to select both of them, Alt right click to select loops, and I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, and B for box select, B for box select, and then middle mouse click to deselect that chunk that I accidentally selected. It is important to know how to go back into that. Also, undo works wonders, which is kind of fantastic. I love how Blender holds on to selection as an undo history. And I'm just going to kind of drag this in to make it more round. Okay, so I'm going to add another circle. Yeah, let's do another circle. And in this, I'm going to switch to the front view. I'm just going to work in this view. I'm hit Control up to embiggen. And I want this to be facing in this direction. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. I'm going to just kind of Control snap drag it up here. Scale it down. Control down to switch over to my other viewports. Z to switch between shaded and wireframe mode. I'm gonna just do a bunch of basic scaling and extrude in this pane. G for grab, drag over, and it should be about even. I'm just gonna create a loop in the center, delete. Which side do I want to delete? I want to delete this side because I want all the, actually no, I want to delete this side because I want all of the vertices on this side to be the ones that I am affecting when under the mirror modifier. So I'm going to delete these ones, and now switch to object mode, mirror mode, switch back, make sure clip's on, dragging around. Okay, we're fine, we're good. I'm actually gonna bring this in a little bit. And that should be good for right now. I'm gonna do, actually need to make our little triangle fan. So extrude, W, merge at center, hooray, and to, so notice how that this area is black. What that means is that the normals aren't calculated in the correct direction. So you can select all by hitting A, Control N to flip, basically make the normals consistent either outside or inside of the mesh, which is a very useful tool to have. Now going to actually edit this part because I want to have a few more, I want to have consistent vertices going in the front. I want to actually close off this shape. So E for extrude, Control click drag. I see that clips off, turning it back on. Click drag. Now that should work, and I'm just gonna fill these shapes. So right click, click, click. Actually, I need to add in another loop right here. Control R, click. So do that. Just select these points. And F2 is fancy and fantastic. Okay. So I also have to do the same aspect over here. And what's cool though is that we can move this by hitting M and click on here, or like any of these other layers, and that'll actually switch us to a different layer. So now it's over in the distance of layer 1, I believe, and you can hit 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 on your number row, and you can hit Alt 1 and it'll go down to the second set of layers. I'll show it to you here. So second set, first set, 1, hit 1, Alt 1, bring you down here. And that'll just help me with building this shape how I had it before. And I just need to grab the right verts. And that is not good. I need to add a loop because we did on the other side. And now I can start connecting shapes. There we go. And F2, again, super valuable. I only had to select that one edge and then hit F a couple times, which is fantastic. All right. So now I'm gonna go back to object mode. I'm gonna move this to the first layer. So all I have to do is hit M1 and that'll transfer it back over here. Now I've got that mesh set up. I'm going to also over here extrude, merge at center, create this triangle fan. And we're actually probably going to change that a bit later. So I have gotten to a point where I want to stop and then continue on the next lesson with more modeling of these basic shapes. And hopefully soon we'll